The war between Israel and Palestinian militant group Hamas, it continues with no end in sight. In Gaza, nearly 900 people have been killed and 1,200 Israelis have also perished since Saturday. Meanwhile, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi voicing his concerns that the conflict is creating instability and could compromise security in the region. Let's get some perspective now, and we're joined by international relations expert, Professor John Stremlau. Prof, good morning to you, and thank you very much for your time. Can I quickly begin with this question around this expected ground offensive by the Israeli troops in the Gaza Strip? The understanding there, and I want to quote a little bit about what the Israeli military has been saying about this, and they're saying that fighting will intensify and the scenes from Gaza will be more difficult to understand and cope with in the coming days. Is that ominous?
It's very ominous. And what are we talking about here? We're talking about a very tiny and overpopulated area, an outdoor prison, in effect, which has been in existence for decades. And to take just a comparative example for a minute, Gauteng is the smallest province and the most populous province in South Africa. Gauteng is 50 times bigger in size than the 300 square kilometers that is the Gaza, which has 2 million people in it. So wow. It's going to be a bloodletting, and it's only right for, I think, the South African government to condemn all civilian deaths on either side. But at the same time, as Nalandi Pandor, the foreign minister, said yesterday, and I think very eloquently, the Palestinians supported South Africans' aspirations for democracy, and therefore South Africa will not forget the injustices being done to the Palestinians, and therefore is identifying with the Palestinian cause. And, that's different than the Americans, but America and South Africa have learned to disagree.
Yeah, and you've invoked America, the president of that country, speaking overnight, at least our time. I just want us to hear a little bit of what Joe Biden had to say about that ongoing conflict in the Middle East.
Let me say again, to any country, any organization, anyone thinking of taking advantage of this situation, I have one word: don't. Don't. Our hearts may be broken, but our resolve is clear.
Professor Stremlau, what do you make of that kind of stance from President Biden?
It's predictable, both for America to defend Israel, which it, after all, sanctioned the creation of Israel back in '48, so for its own guilt, but in any case of anti-Semitism in the earlier periods. But it's also very much in the mode of Joe Biden and of Bill Clinton and other leaders who have taken very, very strong pro-Israeli stand. What Donald Trump would do if he was elected next year, God only knows. But at the moment, he is taking a predictable stance. I worked for Jimmy Carter, and, Carter was, when I first met him, finishing his book on the Middle East peace process, and always called for a two-state solution. And he and I talked about South Africa, and my recollections of the deputy mayor of Jerusalem telling me in the 1980s that he would never go, even though he was participating in a divided cities project with John Dugard at BITS, he would never come to South Africa because he didn't want to see apartheid on a grand scale. So Jimmy Carter titled his book, Peace Not Apartheid. And I think that still holds.
Professor Stremlau, you've got to help us get into the I don't know if I'm correct to say, the headspace of President Biden. This is someone who previously stood with black South Africans who were being oppressed by the apartheid regime at the time. He spoke against apartheid. Here he is, not saying the hostilities between Israel and Hamas must come to an end because of the civilian casualties, but instead he is pledging to support Israel with military equipment, but also talking about the loss of life as if Israel is the only country that is losing lives. Where exactly is his headspace at the moment? Is he forced by circumstances? What exactly?
He has always been a friend of Israel, and politically that makes some sense. But I think emotionally he's also been admiring of the Israeli tenacity. And, Israel is a theocracy different than his religion, but nevertheless, he's not as troubled by it as I am. But I think he also, you can't second guess what's going on behind the scenes in the diplomatic arena. I'd like to, if I could, just be analytic for a second, because I do look at this conflict through South African eyes, and I would hope that Joe Biden and his advisors could do so as well. First of all and foremost, you've got to have leaders who are willing to take risks for peace. And I don't see that on either the Hamas side or on the Israeli side right now. You've got to have ownership of the process of peace negotiation. And, de Klerk and Mandela were offered U.S. assistance for mediation, and they declined because they wanted to own this solution for themselves. And you don't see that on any front in the Middle East right now. Thirdly, there've got to be effective mediators. Now, we didn't have effective mediators in the traditional sense in the 1990s and the 1980s, but there was a growing consensus internationally that apartheid was an evil and it should be ended. And I think that got through to the apartheid authorities when they realized how isolated they were. And the international community is badly divided over, and as the Middle East is badly divided over who's right and who's wrong in this conflict. So the fourth and final analytic category is that there's no vision of an end state. And I have my own vision, frankly, and I think it could possibly be the silver lining in this terrible, terrible mess, which we're just trying to understand. And that is a two-state solution. I just would like to see some other creative answer, but I think that at the moment blood is thicker than constitutional compromises, and so we're not going to see a solution.
This is absolutely amazing to watch. And I just want to one more question, Professor, on the American stance here. This is a world power, and they have the capacity to support Israel with the most sophisticated equipment. And here they are supporting Israel in order to fight Hamas. I guess where I'm going with this is, why is it that it is lost on President Biden that ultimately the warring sides are going to have to come around the table, because war is not the solution. What solves wars are negotiations and diplomacy. Why is that lost on Biden?
It's not lost on Biden, but Biden is also fighting a hot war, giving assistance but not troops in Ukraine and against Soviet aggression, Russian aggression against Ukrainian self-determination. There are inconsistencies all over the place in this multipolar world that we live in, but I would give this conflict some space to sort itself out a bit. And I think that people are positioning themselves right now, governments are positioning themselves. What's a Hezbollah with 150,000 supposedly missiles available? Is it going to enter the conflict or is it not going to enter the conflict? And that could change the equation, and that could be very destabilizing, or it could wake everybody up to the fact that there has to be a two-state solution. We simply don't know, and we don't know where Biden's going to find the military equipment, for heaven's sakes, because he's robbing Peter to pay Paul in order to get material over to Zelensky for the Ukraine war.
Final question to you, Prof. You have the Egyptian president who says he's worried about stability and security in the region, and his comments are very justified given what the Israeli military is saying, and they're saying that there are rockets that are being fired from Syria into Israel. There's also been missiles that are fired from Lebanon by Hezbollah into Israel. Regional stability, as we conclude this conversation, do you foresee this spiraling out of the Israel-Palestine borders?
I don't know where it's going, but I know that there's no stability.
Sure. Short and to the point. Thank you very much for your time, Professor John Stremlau, and giving us his sense there about what's going on in the Middle East.